Hello everybody. Today we're going to look at something pretty special. It's this lens. It's the TTArtisan 35mm f0.95. So we've come out to a place. Where have we come to?
Suffolk,
Flatford Mill. We've come to Flatford Mill, where the famous John Constable painted his famous painting of Flatford Mill. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and reproduce some of the images Constable painted around here, or if we can't do that, I think some of the landscape has changed. If we can't do that, then we're going to get some Constable-esque type images, and we're going to do it with this lovely little lens from TTArtisan. And this is a really beautiful little thing. What do you think of that, Al? A 35mm
it's
f0.95.
just the right amount of sharp on the engraving. It's not sharp and it's not blunt, and it's just fingertip.
Just gives you that really nice feel for fingertip control. I love that scalloped finish that the focus ring and the aperture ring have. It has a real feel of engineering, very like the old school lenses were. And the aperture ring has similar scalloping on it, and we can, if I can get my finger around there, it's quite hard to do this with one hand, we can turn that also with but a single digit, so everything turns very, very nicely, very, very smoothly, and the general feeling of quality on these lenses is really high. And one thing I'm glad to note actually is that we've got engraved markings on this lens. All those markings are engraved just like the old manual focus lenses were, just like the vintage lenses were. And I'm glad to see that, because some of these lenses that I used maybe a couple of years ago, one of the few criticisms I could level at them were that a lot of the markings were painted on or etched on in some way. These are engraved. These are not going to wear off ever. So the general feeling of quality is really high. There's no slop or looseness in any of these controls. Everything turns really nicely and smoothly, and it's a really beautiful little piece of kit. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do with it here today. Now, I don't know if you heard, Al, but one of John Constable's paintings, I think it was Dedham Lock, painted just up there, recently sold for 22 million quid. Right? I reckon if we can make an image similar to that, we're on at least £1 million. What do you reckon?
I suspect more a cup of tea.
Cup of tea. Well, so here we are in the good old English countryside, and what a lot of it there is. I mean, this is your archetypal jolly old England, I guess. Oh, sounds like the dogs are fighting. Oh, they're just having a run about. Yeah, so this is your archetypal jolly old, merry old England, and this is where John Constable was inspired to do his work. And he was very interested in nature, apparently. He felt that nature should inform images and that they should be covered in a way that corresponds to their natural origin as much as possible. However, we have an advantage over Mr. Constable. We have the TTArtisan 35mm f0.95, and I am very impressed with this little lens. Let me start with sharpness. Don't forget this is an f0.95 lens. I'm going to walk by the river because it's nice. This is an f0.95 lens, so fully open, this lens is sharp, which really is quite astonishing. This is an f0.95 lens that will give you a sharp image fully open, and that's a real achievement. Yeah, it does get sharper if you stop it down, but you can shoot at f0.95 all day long and not notice any lack of sharpness, and that is really quite stunning. This is an APS-C lens, so it's not a full frame lens. It doesn't cover the full frame image circle. So it's an APS-C lens, and it's available in all of the popular APS-C mounts: Canon, Fuji, Sony, et al. So, you know, whichever mirrorless camera you've got, this will fit straight on the front. And don't forget, it makes for a very small rig, because you don't need an adapter if you're using a purpose-made lens. This lens goes straight onto your camera, no need for adding extra length with an adapter, and that's really good because it keeps everything very small. We're not short of cows around here. No shortage of cows in Constable country. I can't see any cows at the moment, but I can see evidence of their having been here, and I think I've just stood in some of that evidence. But there we are. That's one of the joys of the countryside. Let me continue with this little lens. So it's a very, very sharp lens. How about aperture blades? Let me count the aperture blades. There are certainly plenty of them. Let me count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks like 10 aperture blades, and they're crafted. I don't know if you can see that. They're crafted to make a circular aperture, or as near to a circular aperture as possible, so you shouldn't get too many annoying out of round light bubbles from point light sources in your background blur. Everything should stay nice and round. And talking about background blur, it's just lovely. If you open this lens up, my gosh, there is loads and loads of blur available, as you would expect, being a 0.95 lens. There's absolutely no shortage of blur, and it's lovely blur as well. It's really, really soft. You could just fall into it. It's delicious and pillowy and billowy and smooth and soft. Just absolutely, just delightful. It makes lots of bubbles from point light sources, loads and loads of little sort of soap bubbles, I think they call them, and it's a really beautiful lens for making background blur. The blur persists at longer distances as well. You don't need to be particularly near to your subject because that aperture's so wide. You can still get blur at really quite some distance from your subject, up to, I don't know, 10 feet, 15 feet or more. And the blur is always nice and soft, with one or two exceptions. There are a couple of harsh points, there are a couple of points where it turns a little busy, but they're so infrequent that it's actually really easy to shoot around. So that's what I've been doing with it. But there's very, very little harshness in this lens, and you really don't notice it that often. Most of the time, 95% of the time, the blur is very, very soft and very, very lovely, and just really nice as I've seen, certainly from any vintage lens and from a lot of modern lenses too. As far as colour goes, this lens really is lovely. It makes very full, very rich, fairly saturated colours with loads of oomph, loads of energy, loads of vitality. Just lovely, just how I like them actually. They are slightly on the cool side. I don't think it's a particularly warm lens. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. So it is slightly on the cool side, and actually that's just how personally I like my colours. I don't like colours that are too warm. Too cool can be a problem, but this lens doesn't go too cool. It seems to strike the balance just nicely. So cool colours, very rich, quite saturated, lots of depth, lots of body, lots of energy. Really a nice lens for colours, as most of the TTArtisan lenses I've tested have been. Actually, they do tend to have very, very nice colour performance. And don't forget, with one of these lenses as opposed to a vintage lens, well, you never quite know what sort of wear that vintage lens has had over the years, how it's been treated, whether it's got a little bit of haze, a little tiny bit of fungus developing. There's none of that with this lens, of course, because this is a brand new lens. There seems to be very little vignetting from this lens as well. Even wide open, the corners are not particularly dark, and that's really nice to see. Dark corners are not necessarily a bad thing, of course. In fact, they can be pretty nice. I actually rather like them in some shots. They can really add a certain effect and focus attention on your subject if that's the kind of shot you want to make. So it can be a good thing, but it's really nice that this lens doesn't have any of it, because it is, at the end of the day, it is essentially an optical flaw. So there's very little of it with this lens. Corners are nice and bright, the whole of the shot is nice and bright. It's a fantastic lens, of course, in low light. Now, back in the day, very wide aperture lenses, for a long time the widest you could get was an f1.2, and back in the day they were used, in the film days, really not so much for background blur like we use them now, but just to get that little bit of extra light in the shot. Light was at a premium because film wasn't particularly sensitive, and it certainly wasn't as sensitive as the digital sensors that we use today. So that's what they were used for back in the day, and this lens certainly doesn't disappoint in that department. There are times, even with a digital camera, when you just don't have enough light, no matter how much you whack up the ISO, and of course your image starts degrading if you go too far. So there are times, even with a modern digital camera, that you just don't have enough light, and this lens will open up very, very wide, you know, to its maximum aperture of f0.95 and let in every available photon to hit your sensor and help make that image. So a fantastic lens for low light work. So I'm very impressed with this little lens. It's very sharp, wide open, quite stunningly sharp in fact. It's got 10 aperture blades, so your point light sources in the background blur, all of those little point light sources will be circular, or as near to circular as they can be. It's fantastic in low light. There are very few lenses that are better in low light. It has very little vignetting and very, very nice colour performance too. And on top of all that, it's very nicely made and has a real feeling of quality. So yeah, a very, very nice little piece of kit. And if you're looking for a nice wide aperture 35mm for your APS-C lens, for your APS-C camera, this little beauty could well be it. It's certainly well worth a look if this kind of lens is on your list. So I'm going to take a stroll up here amidst the beauty of Constable country, and it really is very beautiful indeed. We've got fantastic light today. It's a real gift, the weather and the light today in sort of mid-autumn here in the UK. It's a beautiful autumn day, and I'm going to go and see what images I can make, and you will see them. In fact, you've probably already seen many of them already. Many thanks to subscribers, many thanks everybody. I really appreciate everybody who has subscribed, everybody who's recently subscribed, everybody who's subscribed a while back, and many thanks also go to patrons, without whom this show could not do what it does. So many thanks to you. I'm off now to take a few shots with this wonderful little lens in this beautiful landscape. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy the content on this channel, you might want to become a patron yourself over at www.patreon.com. Patreon.com/Zenography. I ought to know that by now. Many thanks for watching, and if you're not doing anything next time, please do tune in and join us. Thanks everybody. Cheerio.